Say who you are.
I'm a postdoctoral associate at Virginia Tech with the Invasive Species Working Group.
Great. And Emily and I have been working closely on a number of partnership projects between the town and the Invasive Species Working Group. So she was very gracious to be our speaker today to talk about backyard invaders, invasive plants and animal species, and how they impact our lives and ecosystems. With that, I'm going to leave that.
Thank you so much, Carol, for inviting me and for that introduction. So again, my name is Emily Reed. I'm a postdoc at Virginia Tech. I've been here since August of 2021. And today I'm going to be giving you a presentation that's very different from any presentation I've done before. I'm really excited, but you're also a little bit, you're guinea pigs. And I'm going to be telling you what I call hidden stories of backyard invaders. And to make sure that we're all on the same page, let's see how it'll work this time. There we go. When I say invasive species, this is the definition I'm talking about. So this is from, there was a 1999 executive order on invasive species. It was updated again in 2016. So it's non-native to the ecosystem, and its introduction causes or is likely to cause harm in some way. And that could be economic harm, environmental harm, harm to human or animal health. And again, these are ors, it can be and or, but we'll see that in the invasive species I'll tell you about today, their impact varies to, very broadly affecting everything to very specific systems. And to give you an idea of what I'm going to do, calling this a dirty dozen. So I have 12 species. It's actually more than 12 species because Carol and I couldn't agree, but it's 12 stories about invasive species that I know I have in my yard here. I'm in Giles County, but I know that are here in Blacksburg that you all probably see very frequently. But I'm going to be telling you about them in a way that you might not have heard about before. And I'm not going to be focusing on identification or control. If those are things that you're really interested in, there are amazing resources that I'm going to share with Sustainable Blacksburg afterwards for them to post with the recording of this presentation. I'm really going to be going into, how did they get here? What impacts do they have? And what are some things about them that, spark curiosity and interest? So clearly this will be a little biased towards the things that I find really interesting, but I hope at least it'll make you all interested in going and finding out more about the species you'd love to see or hate to see. I'm going to start out by giving you a little context about myself, because again, it's a little biased towards the species I'm interested in. And so I have my PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology. And a lot of my peers in graduate school had these stories about how they knew they wanted to be biologists because when they were kids, they were outside playing in the woods. They had field experience from young ages. They were doing research. And I was pretty intimidated because I was not that kid at all. When I was an undergrad, my major was French. Took some years off, found biology, found some excitement, but it took me a while to get there. And a big part of it was because I did not like to go outside. And I've been thinking about this a lot. And one of the reasons is because I have terrible allergies. Like when I was in middle school, I had laryngitis for 2 to 3 weeks every year where I just couldn't talk. Like right now, I feel like it's been one of the worst allergy seasons. It's gone on much longer than I'm used to. Luckily, the hay fever symptoms have been a little muted, but it's been rough. And it turns out a lot of the reason for that, there's a lot of allergens out there, but grasses are terrible for allergies. And there are a lot of them. And a lot of the ones that we are reacting to are not native here. So there's, I'm going to show you this. I got allergy tested a couple of years ago. You can't really see it, but all of these up here are non-native grasses that grow everywhere. And they have my reaction. So it was a score from 0 to 4. The ones in red are the ones that are 4, so the max. And the ones in orange are 3s. So pretty close. So every single one of these black grasses I'm allergic to. So where did these come from? So they were almost all, like I said, there's, you know what, over 8 species up there, or about 8. They are almost all introduced originally for grazing and hay production for agriculture. And this was introductions in the 1700s. And some of them, like orchard grass, it's very common. It doesn't actually cause that many problems in terms of biodiversity in ecosystems. It tends to stay where humans are. There's a lot of it, but it doesn't form these terrible monocultures. It's not as impactful. And that's one of my red ones. And then another one of my, I think it's that first one that's just one of my orange allergies, the Timothy grass. That's a very different story. So again, introduced in the 1700s for farming. It was the single most important crop for hay production in the 1800s. And it is a huge problem, especially out west. There are national parks where Timothy grass has invaded, and they're like, there's nothing else we can do. And it's changed the ecosystem there, changed the wild animals that exist in those systems. And it's a big problem. But for here, I personally don't like them. I feel like they're invasive because they do harm to me, because it makes, 4 months out of the year fairly miserable. Another thing that I think is miserable, I'm from North Carolina originally, so not too far, but another reason not to go outside is because of ticks and thorny things. And it'll become clear why I said ticks in a minute. But now I'm going to talk about 2 species, 2 very thorny species called multiflora rose, that's the one on top, and Japanese barberry on the bottom. And these don't have the same introduction story. Multiflora rose was introduced in 1866 because it was rootstock for domestic roses, or roses to grow and trade for horticulture. Roses are beautiful, but they're susceptible to diseases and bugs, and they're also kind of finicky. This multiflora rose was much hardier than some of the native roses or the roses that we were growing. So we did this rootstock where they used these and then transplanted the roses that we like to see with all the colors on top of it. And then it ended up being used as ornamentals, more in the 1900s. I'm not good with dates, so I'm looking down to make sure I have my dates right. Japanese barberry was also introduced. It was introduced a little later than multiflora rose, just as an ornamental. I mean, it's red, it's beautiful, it's awesome. One thing that's not so good about them, like I said, is they're very thorny. Multiflora rose has these nice hooked thorns all up and down the stems. Barberry has these really sharp, almost like needles just coming out at kind of regular intervals. So again, they're pretty different. They're both flower producing, seed producing, but this is where the commonality comes in. They're both great habitats for ticks. And there have been several studies that have shown not only are they great habitats for ticks, but ticks are more likely to be carrying Lyme disease when they are living in these bushes. And there's a reason for that. Rats and mice and small rodents, we call these reservoirs for disease, which means that they can carry Lyme disease without any kind of negative impacts on them. And when ticks first hatch, the larvae, they're not infected with Lyme. Even if the parents had Lyme, it doesn't vertically transmit like that. So they have to acquire Lyme from somewhere. So these rodents, they're small, they're really good at navigating these species. And the species, the barberry and the rose, are really good habitats to keep them safe from other predators. So they can just reproduce and reproduce in these habitats and not really at risk. There's a high density of rodents. The ticks flock to it. There's a high density of ticks. You know, they like to stay in the same place if there's a food source. So the cycle gets, you know, repeated, and the amount of Lyme actually increases. So a good reason to try to finally tackle that multiflora rose in your backyard. Again, I mentioned I'm from North Carolina. We don't have Lyme there yet. So coming here and learning that, like, if you pull a tick off of you, like, call a doctor was pretty new to me, and it's definitely made me reconsider how I manage my yard and in terms of tick. And our dog has his Lyme vaccine. I don't know why we can't have one for me yet, but. And then I promise I'm going to start talking about how much I hate the outdoors soon. I don't hate them anymore, but there's a final pest that's actually very special to my heart that makes being outside somewhat miserable, and those are mosquitoes. Really, here, 2 mosquitoes in particular. So these are both invasive species. They're called the tiger mosquito, that's the smaller one, and the rockpool mosquito, that's the larger one. These are pretty recent introductions. So they were brought over. The tiger mosquito was first found in Texas in 1985. The rockpool mosquito was found a little bit further north in the late 1990s. The rockpool mosquito, they're going to be ones that you see early in the season when you don't think you should be bitten by mosquitoes and they're biting you. That's probably these guys. And the tiger mosquito is one of the most aggressive mosquito species in terms of biting and biting people. In fact, it's the most invasive mosquito species anywhere. It's all over the place. And what's cool about these guys is that there's a really, really good reason that they're so good at invading systems. And that's because they can reproduce in all of the things that we like to collect in our backyards, right? So bird baths, watering cans, tires, flower pots, tarps, anything that can collect water, these guys will lay their eggs in it and they'll hatch and they'll be there. There's huge swarms. They're also day biters, which is pretty unusual for mosquitoes. A lot of the other ones that are native don't like humans and they don't come out during the day. So why do they like these habitats so much? Well, it's because they have a really interesting evolutionary history, and that these are container breeding mosquitoes. And so in their native environments away from humans, they lay their eggs in tree holes or other very small amounts of water, and that's for predator avoidance. So mosquito larvae are aquatic and they're little guys, and there's a lot of things that like to eat them, including other mosquito larvae. And so by laying their eggs in these tree holes or natural bodies of water that dry up, there's no predators to eat them. So the eggs actually have to become completely dried and then re-inundated with water before they hatch. So why would that make it a good invasive? One, the eggs can stay dried out but viable for a long time. And two, they already know to look for small areas of water that are ephemeral, that'll dry up and re-inundate. So they were perfectly suited to adapt to urban systems and humans because of just how they evolved in the natural environment. And I mentioned that these are somewhat special to me. My dissertation was on the tiger mosquito and genetics in urban environments and looking at how they're able to move around. And so I actually have a tattoo of one. I know. Doesn't mean I like them. I would rather them not be here. It's another thing where they were terrible when I was a kid, and somehow I've been drawn back into this world. I keep going back to the things that really irked me as a child. So yeah, again, they can go from this to this with no problems. Another place they really like to lay their eggs is our next invasive species, bamboo. This is golden bamboo. That's going to be the most common type of bamboo that we'll see around here, that's non-native. And bamboo, it's another one that was introduced in the late 1800s. The USDA actually introduced bamboo on purpose starting in around 1914, for things like erosion control, privacy, ornamental, gardening, etc. But they really encouraged people to plant bamboo in the early 1900s. Now it's terrible. It grows very, very quickly. It's one of the fastest growing invasive plant species in the world. And it's very difficult to control. So in Virginia, the state government has spent over $78,000 trying to control bamboo on the historic site of the Battle of Yorktown. So a lot of money to try to preserve these historic places. And yeah, it's still being sold. You can still buy this and plant this, although it's becoming more regulated in different states. And one of the reasons is because it provides great privacy. And it's kind of nice to have a natural fence instead of, chain link or something. But it very easily goes out of control. And here's something that I bet you don't know about bamboo that might, again, make you think more about whether or not you want to plant it as fencing. And that is that these bamboo shoots are great habitats for a disease called histoplasmosis. If anybody's heard of that before, it is transmitted by a fungus that is found in bat and bird feces. So then why is this a great spot for it? Well, birds love to roost on bamboo. And when bamboo is a monoculture taking over everything, that's kind of their only choice. And these nice shoots are great places for feces to accumulate and for those fungus to sit and just wait. And it can be airborne, so you can breathe it in. So be careful when you're doing your bamboo control. But it's another way. And two of the species that really like to sit on bamboo, the American crow and the starling. Here I have a picture of another non-native species, invasive species, the house sparrow, sitting on some bamboo. But starlings are a big deal. And again, that's my nice transition to my next species, talking about the European starling. Again, these are species that really like to aggregate, and there's just very large numbers of them in one place. That's another reason why the histoplasmosis can be really bad, because they will all come together. They're transmitting this fungus between one another, and they're all pooping all over your bamboo. But they have a lot of other impacts. So they're terrible for agriculture. I did not realize how bad they were until I was doing some research for this presentation, but they cost the United States, millions and millions of dollars a year in agricultural loss. I was hearing the other day, my girlfriend went blueberry picking for Moon Hollow. They're going to have their new blueberry sour saison coming out, and there's all this bird netting around it. And I was like, that's weird, because when I think about blueberries, I'm much more concerned about what's crawling on them, the insects and the blights. But birds are a huge problem for blueberries, which, I mean, I get it, I like them too, but especially starlings. So it's not just, your large crop, it's also your fruits that they're impacting. And they're pretty aggressive. They bully a lot of birds. They can also spread diseases. The evidence that I found, it's pretty hard to prove direct impacts of one invasive species on a native species populations, because there's all these different, things impacting native species. So they play a role, but woodpeckers in particular seem to be negatively impacted by starlings. Does anybody know the story of why starlings are in the United States? This is pretty fun. So, okay, we got somebody. So they were introduced in the 1800s in New York. They really, really, really wanted to have starlings in the United States. There were so many failed introductions. They kept bringing them in from Europe, releasing them. They would all die. There were these groups that were like naturalization groups where their purpose, they were mostly white men, European descent, that thought that they wanted all the birds and species in Europe to be naturalized everywhere. So this was one of the groups that was responsible. But so the story goes, one of these people in one of these groups was a huge fan of Shakespeare. And his goal was to introduce all 60 species of birds that Shakespeare mentions into the United States. And there's so many articles about this. The invasive species we can blame on Shakespeare. Ever wonder how European starlings came to the US? Blame Shakespeare. Thanks a lot, Shakespeare. Turns out, completely made up. I was so excited. I had not heard the Shakespeare part of the story. And so I was doing more and more research and I was like, this is so cool. Not true. No evidence that this guy liked Shakespeare in any way, but everything else is true. He wanted to introduce species. He was part of one of these groups. The starlings that he introduced, 16 breeding pairs, are likely one of the sources for all of the starlings we have today. There were probably some other successful introductions in other parts of the United States, but this is really like, we can tell like 23andMe a starling and track it back to one of those 16 breeding pairs in New York. But yeah, no more catchy headlines, unfortunately, but still a problematic bird with an interesting history. And now I'm going to take a little bit of a left turn, and I'm not going to have my nice transition, but it'll come around, and I'm going to talk about the plant everybody loves to hate, the Callery pear. So the Callery pear was first introduced in the early 1900s, early 1900s as rootstock for pears, kind of like the multiflora rose. But then in the 1950s and 60s, when we really saw an explosion of suburbanization in America, people owning homes, having land, this suddenly became a really, really popular ornamental, planted all over neighborhoods. In fact, some homeowners associations, even as recently as the 1990s, had a requirement where you had to have a Bradford pear planted in your yard. And these plants were great. They were resilient to this blight, which was why they were originally used for wood, as a rootstock. They were pretty. They grew really fast. They were wonderful. Like, this is a little excerpt from the New York Times from like 1965. Bradford pear has many assets, but people were raving about this. It wasn't really until the 1980s, 90s that people started realizing that it was not just in people's front yards anymore, that it was spreading. And it was weird because these cultivars, like Callery pears, the species Bradford is a cultivar, they're sterile because they're all clones, and plants had a system so that they can't reproduce with something with the exact same DNA as it. But it turns out because Bradford pears were so popular, everybody was making their own cultivars. And all it took was for one person in your HOA to decide that they were going to plant a different cultivar for them to become fertile again, for them to be able to produce fruit and spread. They're also terrible because they are not very resilient. Once the trees are older, they fall apart. So they were not great for many reasons, but they had already been planted everywhere. And so then it was like in the early 2000s, there was this sudden turn and kind of like a cultural shift to hating the Callery pear. And in fact, here in Blacksburg, there had been Callery pear planted all along the streets. And this article is from 2004. Blacksburg decided they were going to take all of the calorie pears down and replant them. And I spent a lot of time trying to find older pictures from before 2004 where I could see the Bradford pears or see them fruiting, and it was pretty difficult. But these are just some of the ones I found before that period where you can kind of maybe pick out some. And so I told you this was going to relate back to starlings. Well, turns out starlings really like nesting in calorie pear on Main Street, on College Avenue. And this is what Carol has told me. You learn to not park your car under the calorie pear so that it wouldn't be covered with starling feces. And you can kind of see that in this main picture, like there's some avoidance of parking under the trees. So now hopefully we don't have to worry about that quite as much. And I haven't had any issues since I've been here. So I think it worked, Carol. All right. The other thing about calorie pears that I'm sure you know is that they're super stinky. It should have been a clue right away, in my opinion, but eventually that's part of what turned people is that they just smelled horrible. What else smells horrible? The brown marmorated stink bug. So this is another very recent introduction. Really wasn't detected in the United States until the 1990s. It was probably a hitchhiker, so not intentionally introduced like a lot of the plant species I've talked about. It likely hitchhiked as an adult on irises. And these guys are a lot of fun. Not only are they super annoying to have in your house, but they are another huge pest on agricultural systems. And not just as adults, but even the larvae can get into your food. They love tomatoes. They love, pretty much, I think just about everything. I think there's over 100 species that they have been found to feast off of that are economically important. But one cool thing about these guys, I'll have to admit, I struggled to find a cool thing about the brown marmorated stink bug. Apart from the fact that they don't really hurt you or your house in any way, they're just super obnoxious to have around and they smell really bad. But their eggs all hatch at the exact same time. So when it's like you don't see any, and then suddenly you have a ton of these babies everywhere, and then a ton of adults, it's because they all are hatching together. And you can see from this video, like literally at the exact same time. And the reason for this is because the baby stink bugs, the larvae, will not eat other larvae, but they will eat eggs. So if you're going to be a late hatcher, you're going to be eaten. So they evolved. The other kind of cool thing about this is that their hatching has been shown to be triggered by a certain resonance, a certain frequency. And I don't know why. I have the paper if you want to read it and see if you can decipher it. But there's just a certain frequency you can play and they'll just start hatching immediately. So I want to learn what that is to make sure that it's never played in my house. Like, if I have to avoid certain TV shows, that's okay. Moving on. Yeah, another fun one. This is one of my personal battles. This was one of the first invasive species I really learned to recognize. So it's been my enemy for a long time. English ivy. So again, it's been here for a very long time, English ivy. In fact, it was first, I believe this is correct. It was first identified, found here in Virginia on land that was owned by George Washington. But then it was very widely spread and planted in the 1900s, again, ornamental purposes, to have your nice trellises covered in vines, all about beautification. But I'm going to bring it back to biodiversity. These are pretty terrible for our natural systems. And because we like to live in nature, they're also pretty bad for our homes and our property values. But these vines are interesting. So they'll like creep around the ground. So you'll see these big mats of it forming a monoculture on the ground. But it's really when they start climbing trees that they become a little more dangerous, impactful, because they have these like gnarly, feelers, roots almost that are aerial that dig into the tree, and they climb, and that's where they start to fruit and flower. And they can stay like that for a long time until they eventually kill the tree. All of that green foliage that's evergreen, it's there year round, actually prevents the sun or the tree from photosynthesizing. So it covers up its leaves and the tree can't get the nutrients that it needs, or the sunlight that it needs to process the nutrients. They also can strangle the trees, and they change the kind of microenvironment of the tree so that the insects and the animals and the wildlife that use these trees can't use them in the same way. Thinking about tree hole mosquitoes, I don't know how well they would do at actually getting into, at finding a hole in a tree that's just covered in ivy. But, that's the same for other species as well. The good news is, there's no good news really, but there are folks here in Blacksburg that can help you control English ivy. Carol mentioned the group, the tree savers, tree rescuers, and they are trained. They can train you on how to remove English ivy from your trees. They might be able to help out too if it's crawling up your house, because it can really mess up your foundation and kind of the ceiling, sealant around your house, keeping everything from getting in. So yeah, tree rescuers, take a look, volunteer if you can. You can cut back this ivy a little bit. All right, the next couple are a little bit faster. So I have autumn olive, and this is a tree that I didn't really know about until I came to Blacksburg and started going to Heritage Park a lot and met Carol, and we started talking about it a lot. So autumn olive is another tree. It was introduced in 1830 for erosion control, to provide habitat for wildlife. It was introduced also for like reclamation, like strip mine reclamation. So it's planted in a lot of places where there's already a lot of disturbance. And again, really encouraged by the US government. They were like, this is, plant this everywhere, giving it away. And it turned out not actually that great for wildlife. It can be good habitat, but not the best, not better than native species. And it just takes over. So again, we have this monoculture, it's really brambly. But the other thing about it is that animals love it, especially birds. Birds love their berries, and the berries are really good at dispersing through bird poop. I didn't realize I was going to be talking about bird poop so much today, but there you go. But there's a problem here. The berries that the autumn olive produces are all sugar. And so the birds love it. They'll actually choose to eat autumn olive berries over native berries, but it doesn't provide them with the nutrients and fat that they need to successfully migrate or get through winters. So it's actually causing like emaciation in birds after they migrate. And so it's just one of those interesting interactions where they're choosing to eat these berries. They love them, but it's having this negative consequence. And because migrating birds are eating autumn olive and then flying and pooping along the way, it's really hard to contain it. It's also really good. It produces like thousands and thousands of berries a day or something. So another one, yeah, with these unexpected, maybe you all knew this, but unexpected consequences that isn't the most obvious. And there it is over at Heritage. There's a good monoculture going there. Speaking of monocultures, Japanese stiltgrass, another one that is one of the more easily recognizable plants for me. And this one's interesting because it was introduced for a reason very different from all the other plants that we've talked about. It was introduced it was first detected in Tennessee in 1919. So probably had been used for a while before that, but it was used for packaging. So it was how like there were shipments of, fragile things coming from China, and they would package it, protect it with stiltgrass. So kind of like styrofoam. But again, forms of monoculture. It is a really good indicator that that area is likely to have more invasive species because it's this pioneer species. It comes in, starts to dominate along the edges of roads or along riverways. And there's some evidence that it actually makes it an easier environment for other plant species to invade. It changes the chemistry of the soil. It makes nitrogen less available. And it also, and I don't know the mechanism for this, but encourages invasive non-native earthworms. So there's a lot more non-native earthworms in the soil beneath stiltgrass than there is in, native areas with native plants in the soil there. Invasive earthworms compete with our native earthworms, and some of them are not as good at processing the soil and getting the nutrients back into the soil as native earthworms are. Okay, 11, Japanese beetle. Going back to agriculture. So again, this is our last animal species. And these beetles were, again, not introduced deliberately. They were hitchhikers and were first found in New Jersey in 1916. And kind of like the stink bug, but even more so, they will eat anything. And these are obnoxious too, because not only do the adults eat your plants, you can kind of recognize the damage by the way that they eat the leaves. You get these skeletonized leaves, but their larvae and their grubs will eat your plant from the ground up. So you have multiple life stages you have to worry about. But what's interesting to me about these guys is they do really, really well in very managed green spaces. They love turf. They love turf grass. They love mown lawns. So this is one where if you want to prevent getting a bunch of Japanese beetle infestations, don't mow your lawn. Except for the allergy grasses, cut those off. But, and another reason I found this funny, like I said, I'm from North Carolina, NC State, that's where I went to school. I think the largest revenue source from a research department comes from their turf and sod department. Like, it's a huge industry, and and these guys love it, and it can cause a lot of damage to your nicely managed turf grass. So maybe less of a pest in unmanaged, nice natural yards like mine. And that's what I tell my girlfriend, like, I can't mow today, like the beetles are gonna come, sorry. All right, and my last one for you all today, garlic mustard. It's delicious. It's believed to be one of the oldest spices used by humans. It's native to Asia, and there's signs of it being consumed and used to season things from like over 6,000 years ago. It was introduced into the United States in 1868, probably for culinary purposes and medicinal purposes. Tastes really good. But again, as all things do, there's the tastes good, but it's everywhere. And I don't think we can eat it all alone, at least not all of us in this room. But it has this first year stage, which is the kind of inset, and then its second year stage, which is when it flowers and grows. And this species is interesting and has a lot of negative impacts for a couple different reasons. One is that it has what we call allelopathy, which means that it actually prevents other plants from growing through releasing chemicals, poison, cyanide, basically. It can release it into the soil. The seeds have little bits of cyanide in them, and that actually interacts with the symbiotic fungi in the soil that helps other plants grow. So it kills off that fungus that is beneficial to other plants. Again, forms these monocultures, does really, really well in disturbed areas. You can pull it really easily. Like there's a lot of investment in above ground growth and production of these chemical compounds. So it doesn't have this really extensive root system. So it's very satisfying to pull it. So I highly recommend that as like a good way to get some frustration out at the end of the day. But one thing that you might not know about it is, and again, I've said that we know that it impacts biodiversity where it grows. It's really hard to prove like direct impacts, but it is really threatening the West Virginia white butterfly. And that's because it has outcompeted the butterfly's native plant that it uses as a host to lay its eggs for the caterpillars to feed on. It's kind of replaced that species, and so the butterfly uses garlic mustard as a host instead. Well, it kills off pretty much all of the eggs. The larvae that do hatch almost all die. There's like, I think, almost a 0% survival rate for the caterpillars that are, or the butterflies that are laid on this species. So I hope this has been interesting. I hope this has helped inspire some curiosity. Again, I'm not an expert in any of these plants or these species, but I know a little about a lot, and I get excited about a lot of things. And so that's, again, why I was really excited to present to you all today. I'm with the Invasive Species Working Group at Virginia Tech. Look us up. Let me know if you have any questions about the group. I really, really want to thank Carol for this. This is her with some garlic mustard. During our, we had an invasive species walk last year, and Carol, not only did she pull it up to show everybody what it looked like, throughout the whole walk, she was just picking off the top of the plants where the seeds are and collecting them to bring back, and she just had like this armful at the end of the 45-minute walk. Thank you to Sustainable Blacksburg for having me. Thank you for all for being here, and I would love to take some questions. Thank you.
Well, I think I'm going to monitor the chat. Dr. Reed, if folks ask questions in the audience, can you just repeat it so that the folks at home can hear? And I'll just go monitor the chat. I think that you had your hand up.
You did not mention the Oriental bittersweet, the scourge of area island. It's constant work pulling them up, or if you decide to use a little poison.
Yeah, there were a lot that I didn't mention.
There was a lot of debate.
Yeah, I should also thank Beth Umberger, who sent us some lists of her own dirty dozens of plants. I think I had a list of over 70 species that we had as candidates for this. And so, no, I mean, that's a great one to to learn more about. And again, I'll share resources where you can look up more information about these problematic species and learn a little bit more about how to control them and identify them.
I'm very confused because you see at certain plant stores, they're not really plant stores, like Lowe's and Home Depot, they sell ivy. Now, wouldn't that be against the law? I mean, if it's an invasive species, am I wrong?
So the question was, I remember this time, why are they selling ivy at home goods stores when it's invasive? So the laws around invasive species are very uneven between states, something that I actually have been studying. A big portion of my research here at Virginia Tech has been on state policies about invasive species. So in Virginia, for example, you cannot list a species, add a new species to the noxious weed list, which does prohibit or like very much curtail the sale of noxious weeds if it has economic value. So because these things have been sold as ornamentals, and because there continues to be demand, there are no laws in Virginia about selling them. There's actually some efforts right now to start changing some of those things. A law in Virginia was passed that says that they're going to establish an official invasive species list, and that landscapers and people working on your property have to disclose to you if the species is on that invasive species list. You might have heard about federal noxious weed lists. Turns out that that is really for prevention. So plants that are already widely established in the United States that are kind of like too difficult to eradicate, like it's not going to happen, they're removed from the federal noxious weed list. It's really about prevention and rapid response. But that also makes it seem like, oh, garlic mustard isn't a noxious weed. Ivy isn't a noxious weed, you know? So yes, it's very complicated, but it's totally legal.
I have a question from the chat. Student Harry is asking, wanted to know more about not mowing the grass and how that discourages Japanese beetles.
I do not know the answer to that. I'm sorry to say. That's a great question. I think that there's some reasons to not mow your grass, that there's some good articles about that. Yeah, I don't think the main reason to not mow your grass is to control Japanese beetles. It's not quite like, right. It's, you know, there's pollinators, native pollinators, just general like energy saving. But that is one of a fun connection that I made. So that's a great question. And I'm sorry, I'll have to look it up and get back to you.
If I can jump in as representative of the town, you can't just not mow your grass. However,
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll take a little quick break and let those file out if they need to get going, but I'm willing to stick around if you are to answer questions after.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Another question. I don't see one in the chat.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about the invasive species working group, the variety of species you're working on, how you use those results to cause change?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. Whew. So the invasive species. So the invasive species working group at Virginia Tech was established in 2017 as a way for faculty from all different departments and colleges at the university to work together about this common issue. Because, you know, they recognize that this is like a it's a difficult problem to address. And so we have folks, we currently have 11 people on our steering committee. They are from, anywhere from plant ecologists, invasive plant ecologists, to plant genomicists, freshwater ecologists. We have one person that's a conservation scientist in Guam, so studying the impacts of the brown tree snake, which has eaten almost every single bird on the island. We also have folks that are more on the social science side, so human dimensions, understanding why people make certain choices. We have a policy expert. And so the way that we work together, so, the individuals have certain taxa, certain species that they focus on, but as a group, most of our projects aren't about a specific species or a specific area. We're really talking about how we can better integrate research and policy and people to create action. So what can we do for communities? What information do managers need? And how do we increase that flow of information? How do we help people communicate with each other? How can we be better communicators? So in terms of action, working with the town, I think, is one of the big things that we've done to just start raising awareness about this, bringing folks together to talk, to find out what you all care about. I think I probably went over time a little bit, but again, thanks for that question, and thank you all again for being here and for your questions.
And as a representative of Sustainable Blacksburg, I just want to say thank you. Here's a sustainable gift certificate to Blacksburg Books.
Thank you.
And don't forget about Give Local NRV today. It goes all day and through tomorrow noon to donate to your various organizations, including Sustainable Blacksburg. Thank you.
Kudzu and Crown Veg, are they on this?
Kudzu is, oh yeah, Kudzu is the rough one. I know that that's on noxious weed lists. It's generally not sold as much in stores, or there's like good understanding.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes, exactly, but
And I'm not sure about
spreading.
Crown. It's still, oh yeah, I mean, it's,
I don't know how they got it.
Yeah.
Are they figuring out what to do?
Really
Really before,
some-
in Georgia.
yeah, I mean, there are definitely people working on it.
Okay.
It's hard to know how effective it is, and again, it's like that need to increase communication so that different organizations can be more aware of what other people are doing, so they can team up.
Okay, yeah. Oh, that's scary, this one for me, because I go down.
That's a good one.
Carolina,
Yeah.
South Carolina.
Yeah. Yeah,
But Crown Veg is the problem around here. 'cause it's
I'm not
like
sure. I
over
haven't.
the-
I
It looks like over, it's very pretty.
yeah, I would have to look that one up. That's a good one. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, of course, you there.
So I had a really great, I think, a great experience with, a guy named Invasive. Has a company called Go Escaping.
Awesome.
I still have a huge anxiety. So these goats came in and they cost me and they stayed for 5 days and 5 nights. Electric fence around it, put them in there, and they basically shoot up most of the tribe above the ground, so of course they're not gonna.
Right.
Brains. Okay, I was gonna ask if there was a downside to doing it. Part of the problem with the goats is that there are some things they can't eat. They can't eat rhododendron, they can't eat. A couple of skip whorls, they're poisonous for them.
Yeah.
Things that they also really, really like a couple things that are necessarily want.
Right.
But I was willing to sacrifice.
Right.
So anyway, they put out a nice section. I can understand that if it was a seedy plant and they cleaned it out, then I would just be perpetuating and adding fertilizer.
Yeah.
Was there any other downside?
So I know about the goats and the sheep for invasive species control. I haven't delved into it, if there's like a general message to that. Or the English IVs, the big thing is to not let, once you install it, to not let its byproducts just sit around because like it can break out that way. So then eating it is pretty good because
There was no debris left over.
exactly. And I don't know if, it reduces that potential once it goes through their system or not,
Right.
but, that could be, it's a good question that I should look out and that I can survive, but I doubt it because, not like they're, right, it's not.
Anyway, I also wanted to notice in the goats. They're at Christiansburg and this young guy seemed very knowledgeable. There was an organization. That goes to across the country.
It's getting more and more popular. I knew that there's a group out in Roanoke, but I didn't know